The nature of despotism is that it is fundamentally out of balance. It cannot last. And it takes an immense amount of effort and control and constant vigilance to get it to stay. To put it differently, they make what is abnormal and hateful and destructive normal. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وعلى أصحابه. I wanted to try and give a happy khutbah today because Shayan told me we need our spirits lifted. But then 5 minutes after that, he told me that crew lost Cucho. And so unfortunately, you can blame him for the khutbah if it's not happy enough, because that has put me in a bad mood the entire day. Today is the 15th of Sha'ban, and the year 1446. We're 2 weeks away from Ramadan. I'm going to tell you 3 stories. The first is a story about a mother and despotism. The second is a story about a young man under a despotic system. And the third is about the tragedy of a despot. The first story takes place in a society, a very despotic society, a heavily classist society, where people are split into groups based on race and turned against each other. And in this society, it is ordered by the despot to kill all the young men. And as a result, women are left unprotected and unable to earn money to live. And quite a few of them are forced into prostitution. And then that despot taxes the prostitution. And there is a mother who knows that her baby son is going to be killed. And the fear is so tremendous that her heart is like a vacuum, an empty space. She's paralyzed with fear, knowing that her son is going to be killed like all the other sons before him. And she is inspired with the thought that if she takes this baby and sends him off down a river, that at least then, surely, there's a chance more than if he stays with her. This situation that this mother is forced into is a story that we've heard a lot. So many times that it's glossed over, that we dissociate from it and don't really think about the terror that she must have felt. We all know this story and we know how it goes, that this baby is found by someone in Pharaoh's palace by his wife and cared for. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His mercy brings the mother back to the baby as a wet nurse. And Musa is allowed to be raised and develop a relationship with his mother that ties him to his Israelite heritage. The second story is about him, who, because of the mother's story, because of how things began, was raised in luxury, was spoiled. And one day, he killed a man. It was then that he realized he has a temper problem, that he cannot control his anger. And he sought Allah's forgiveness. This part in Surah Al-Qasas is very interesting. Because on the surface level, yes, he sought forgiveness because he killed a man. But remember that this despotic society that thrives on turning one group of people against another group of people, that the other thing Musa was seeking forgiveness for was taking part in this despotic society, was continuing the trend of turning against each other, even if it came from a place of being tired of the racism, being tired of the oppression. What happens next to Musa is very interesting, because Pharaoh orders for him to be killed, and he flees. He flees to Midian, where a man, an older man, makes a deal with him that if he is to work for 10 years, he will allow him to marry his daughter. So Musa works as a shepherd for 10 years. This is another fact that we gloss over, because this work as a shepherd is grueling. It's hard. And for 10 years, day in and day out, Musa is living in the exact opposite conditions of which he was raised. Poverty, hard work that develops patience, that develops character, that fixes what's inside of him. And at the end of that term is when he receives the message. Is when he receives his marching orders. Because although Musa had anger in his heart, and although Musa understood the oppression and the inequality in the society, and hated the despotism, and had a relationship with his mother, so he had correct understanding, but his inner character was flawed, was still fundamentally a part of that despotic society. Understanding was not enough, because he was spoiled and rotten by luxury and privilege. I don't think it's any coincidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him his marching orders at that point. He had to be cleansed. He had to be fixed. The third story, the tragedy of a despot, Pharaoh. There was a khutbah that I gave a while ago that talked about Pharaoh. And one of the fascinating things about this figure to me is that how his own actions and his own behavior and his own decisions lead to his own destruction. In trying to eliminate all the males, he ended up creating the very situation where the male that ends up coming and knocking him off his podium, so to speak, ends up in his very palace. You have the luxury of his palace that spoils Musa. And that life plays a role. It taught Musa something. And again, once he decided to kill Musa, it drives him to the very thing that will make him the person that will bring about his undoing. The nature of despotism is that it is fundamentally out of balance. It cannot last. And it takes an immense amount of effort and control and constant vigilance to get it to stay. So given what is happening in the world, I don't feel any despair, because I know that it will topple over. And when it does topple over, and before it topples over, I will be there, and I will surround myself with people who will be there to make sure that what needs to happen will happen. Ask Allah for forgiveness. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم سبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه. Surah Al-Qasas, the story, the narrative, is a powerful surah in a chain of powerful surahs. Surah Maryam, Surah Taha, Surah Dukhan, Surah Shu'ara, and then Qasas, and then Namal, and then finally Surah Isra. That arc, if you can call it an arc, that section of Project Illumine is one that I keep coming back to and keeps enrapturing me. Because these are not isolated messages. The thing about Islam is that it is both an internal message and an external message. It cannot be separated. You cannot call yourself, you can call yourself a Muslim legally. But a Muslim, someone who follows Islam, if you are only focusing on the external but ignoring the internal transformation. At the time that this came, during the early Muslims, when this was revealed, it says this in the halaqah, that it was as if Allah was preparing Muslims to not just undergo the internal transformation, but to take on the world and solve its problems. It was preparing them for something internal and external. And this example of Musa, of someone who both had to engage the external, but it was equally as important that he engaged the internal, was given time and time again as an example to the early Muslims. So when week after week or month after month, when I give khutbahs, essentially I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying go back to the Quran. Turn to the Quran. I know right now there is a lot of fear. There is a lot of confusion. There is a lot of panic. Our entire judiciary branch is about to be gutted. It's scary. And it might seem like, well, now's not the time to go to the Quran. Now is exactly the time to go to the Quran. Because the difference between this religion and other religions and other ways of being is that it is telling you what to do externally. And here at Usuli, we don't give easy answers. We help you connect with the thing that can help you find the answers. Because I am not going to play in the delusion that I know what you should do. I am not omnipresent. I am not a chess master who is sitting and can figure out what every little person should do to get the desired outcome. But what I do know is that the Quran has infinite lessons in it. And Surah Al-Qasas is a lesson about narrative, is a lesson about the power of stories, is an affirmation, and the fact that it was named Qasas is almost as if the Muslims were affirming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we know why you gave this to us. Because Fir'aun was adept at constructing narratives that legitimate the institutions that render perverse ways of being as normal. To put it differently, they make what is abnormal and hateful and destructive normal. They convince you that you contributing to your own destruction is an extremely normal thing and is the way that things should be. That whether subconsciously or consciously make you more focused on competing with others, just to get a little bit closer to the source of power, just to get a little bit more money, a little bit more influence, a little bit more security. Breadcrumbs. Stories are so important. You and I run on stories, run on narratives about ourselves, about our careers, about our racial identities, about our politics. And if you are not engaging with the stories from the Quran, you are engaging with the stories that you get from Instagram, from TikTok, from YouTube, from Netflix. And some of those stories are probably good, and some of those stories are probably bad. But I'll tell you what, I don't think probably is a very safe place to be, because you won't be able to recognize it. And that is why the Quran is completely necessary. And why it is the biggest mercy. I see a lot of groups that discuss all of the problems, all of the politics, and all of these. It is important that we talk. And I'm done criticizing other Muslims. If someone is doing good work and putting their best foot forward, I want to work with you. That is always my motto, because of Surah Al-Qasas. Because the narratives and the system that Fir'aun created were one of exclusion, one of supremacy. But the system that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam created was a system of shura, was a system that encouraged inclusion, that told you have a place here, that recognized your equality by not glossing over racial identity. In Surah Al-Qasas, it describes Fir'aun's lackeys as imams calling to the fire. They have imams too. We all have an imam. And the way that they call to the fire is through stories, is through narrative. And yes, this is me telling Muslim artists, you absolutely should be an artist. You absolutely do need to become successful. You absolutely do need to do what you are being called to do. But this is larger than just stories that you see on Netflix or stories of fiction. This is about the story that you tell yourself. This is about the reasons why you have convinced yourself that you don't need to transform in the way that you once thought, or the way that you felt when you were watching that halaqah, or the way that you thought you should transform that one day when you woke up for Fajr, and then it went away. It's time to transform. It was time, and it's not too late. So, one final note. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah did not just do what he did out of pragmatism. He didn't just bring Musa's mother back to Musa because that meant his will would be able to be done. He did it out of compassion for her grief. And this comes up again. Allah points to his care for the individual. When Musa asks, I'm very anxious to go to Fir'aun and do this. Can I bring my brother? He's a much more eloquent speaker. And Allah obliges. Do you think Allah is dependent on these little details to make happen what he wants to happen? This is the difference between a despotic system and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is if you are anxious, Allah cares. Allah wants you to be gentle with yourself. If you are grieving, Allah cares. And Allah wants to bring to you the thing that will fix your temper, that will fix your grief, but wants to bring you more. And that's why it takes time, because Allah is the best of planners. And I am impatient, and I want what I want when I want it. Allah, forgive our sins, guide us on the straight path, help us to surrender to your will and pray for knowledge of your will and the power to carry that out. Allah, grant that we be more compassionate, more gentle, more understanding. Allah, help us to find the community that will help us to become better and help us to find the community that we can make better. Ya Rabbil Alameen, wa aqim as-salah.